Hi, I'm Don Tinney, a high school English teacher from South Hero, Vermont, currently serving as your Vermont-NEA President. And I'm happy to be here today with Rebecca Holcombe, who is running for the office of governor. So welcome, and let's get our conversation started with our opening question of why are you running for this office?
Well, thank you, Don, for having me here. And first of all, I'm pleased to be able to join. I was an NEA member. I've been a science teacher and a social studies teacher, and I'm really proud to recently have been Vermont Secretary of Education. And I'm running because some of you may know that I spent some of my childhood in other countries that didn't have public education, that didn't have strong public health, and where the leaders got 99% of the vote and there wasn't a free press. And I learned in those places how important public institutions that are strong and give everybody a fair chance are to making sure that we don't have grotesque inequality, ethnic and racial discrimination, and people who just don't have a fair chance. And I believe in public education. I am committed to public education and its role in protecting democracy and making sure our future is prosperous, and I will do everything I can as our governor to make sure that we protect it. I think we're running out of time. We have hard problems that need comprehensive solutions and an ability to work with all kinds of people to get the job done for Vermont, and I think I'm uniquely positioned to do that.
Thank you. And if you could talk a little bit about your views of a very current topic, which is the reopening of schools.
Thank you. And this is a really important question, and I've been hearing from teachers and educators and families all over the state about this. The first thing I want to do is thank our educators, because when COVID started to surge back in February, we all knew where we were probably headed. And we asked our educators to do the impossible, to pivot in only 2 days and bring their entire program online. It wasn't possible. I want to thank them for doing everything they could to maintain relationships with our students and make sure people were safe in the transition. I know how hard it was, and I know how frustrating it was to do a job where you had all of the parts that were hard about teaching, but not the parts that were most important and most rewarding. So thank you. Thank you as a mother, and thank you as your former Secretary of Education. The second is we need to be ready to open and follow public health evidence-based guidelines to open in the fall. But we also need to be equally ready to not open if we sense that there's a real and present danger to our children and to our educators and to their families. So the first thing we have to do to make sure we're ready to open, if we do, is to make sure that health is our first priority. And that means we need to make sure the Vermont Department of Health is adequately staffed and adequately resourced to support this opening. Right now, there's evidence that there's delay in testing. If we do reopen, we will need to do much more testing than we're currently doing to ensure that our communities are safe. We also need to make sure that the VDH has sufficient staffing to confront the need for increased tracking and tracing across all communities, particularly if there's a surge or even multiple surges at the same time. And I put out a statement on this. I encourage people to go to my website and look at it, because we can't open if we aren't sure that we have the public health support to make sure that opening is safe. And that also means individual consultations with districts to address unique public health needs in their own settings. Not all our schools are the same. We have different physical plants and different capacities. We need locally customized solutions that are developed in consultation with public health experts. That means we need to have experts who are available. The second is the state needs to step up on some of its responsibilities, including with respect to funding mental health and making sure there's adequate broadband in every community. We know that education is not equitable no matter how hard our educators work if there isn't sufficient broadband to continue communications in the event that we have to go virtual again. And we also know that our kids are coming back. They're going to have significant trauma, many of them, and significant mental health needs because of their long absence from schools. We also know that some of them may be behind in their learning and need additional support just to be able to come back and join their classes. We need to be stepping up and not blaming schools for costs that have been incurred because of failure of state funding and failure of state action on those critical priorities. And we need to stop demoralizing educators and trying to short them on resources in the middle of a crisis. I put out a statement on this. I also encourage people to go online and look at this, because now is absolutely not the time to be forcing school budgets to be revoted in every single community in the middle of a pandemic. That would just punish the schools, punish our communities that need help the most, right at the very time we need to be planning for safe opening. And as your governor, I will not do that. We also need to make sure that we are looking at how to support robust solutions that are locally appropriate. We know that safety, providing for education, that makes sure that people have a fair chance is our top priority, but we also know that it's a very different situation in an elementary school than in a middle school than in a high school because of different developmental needs at each of those levels. We also know that there are going to be significant differences across regions. Again, we need to be clear about what is safe and what is the best way for schools to approach reopening, but also have good consultation with the Department of Health to make sure we have regionally appropriate solutions. So those are some of the things that come across my mind, and we could go on, but I know you have other questions as well.
Sure, thank you. As governor, how will you address systemic racism and inequity in all of Vermont's institutions?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for saying all, Don, because we've heard a lot of talk about inequity and racism in schools. And, the educators I know that we have challenges around making sure that we are truly working to be anti-racist, to remove the barriers and the bias that prevents some people from doing their best and making their imprint on Vermont in a positive way. And I actually want to thank the NEA for taking the lead on this, because I know that the NEA has put equity into your core platform. And I know that you've done good work with districts around the state to look at issues of systemic racism and figure out how to modify our curriculum in ways that really celebrate the strengths and the assets of every child and get away from some of the biased interpretations of history in particular that we've had in the past. That's a great beginning. And and I know that that's something we still have to do in every classroom. I spoke with a middle school student who mentioned how hard it was for her. Her name's Julia Gianni, and how much pressure she feels to speak up on racism every time. And as the leader of the state, I will try to model how, as white educators and white leaders, we surface issues of racism and bias to make sure that we are being advocates for all students, including our communities of color, so that we're not putting that burden on them. But as you said, this is a responsibility of all sectors. We know that racism and bias are evident even in very young children before they come to school, because they're picking it up in our environment. And we know it's an issue in our provision of public health services, in our law enforcement. And in every sector, we should do what we have started to do in education, and we can learn from our experience in education. We've had robust reporting for different marginalized groups so that we can hold ourselves accountable for making the difference that we need to be. And that model should be done across all sectors. We also have begun aggressively training in implicit bias. The Agency of Education, I believe, is the only agency that did implicit bias training across all of its employees with the help of the Human Rights Commission. And I know that many school districts have been working aggressively to do this as well. We need to subsidize and support those efforts moving forward, and make sure that not only do educators have access to training and professional development, but also access to good curricular models and materials that help them deliver an anti-racist curriculum as well. And so those are just some of the things that we've done. And, I think we need to hold ourselves accountable for making the difference we want to be for our students, because I don't think there's any place more than public schools where we all come together and we see visibly that if we do the right thing and make sure everybody has a chance to succeed, we all benefit. And the last thing I would just say is, I know that school safety, and it has been a tough issue. We do have some disproportionality in our discipline data around race, also around students who are economically disadvantaged and disabled. And we need to look hard at that and think about how we can ensure the safety of schools, but in ways that don't end up criminalizing students for really behavior that's a discipline issue. And, I know Governor Scott has been very focused on putting school resource officers into schools, but I also think that there's a very important role for educators in educating children about what it means to be part of a community and what it means to behave in ways that are supportive and restorative. And I'd really like us to see schools get back to education and not rely on policing to make schools places that feel safe. I just don't think that works, and I don't support expanding SROs into every school in the state. I think that takes resources away from schools.
Thanks. And just to wrap up in the last minute or two, any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Well, somebody, and when I was interviewed for my local paper told me that now is, they asked me what I would do if I had the superpower of invisibility. And all I could think is, this is not a time to be invisible. Right now, we see more than at any other time in my lifetime that basic public institutions like public education are under attack, both at the federal level and here at the state level. In fact, there was a Supreme Court decision that just came down that says that if we provide any kind of vouchers or subsidy to private schools, we're obligated not just to do it to non-sectarian schools, but also to religious schools as well. That has profound implications for education in Vermont. And it's really time for all of us to be talking about what we believe in, what it means to be a community school, and what it means to have inclusive environments that support every child so that every person in Vermont can benefit from our bright future. And I want to just end by acknowledging one other issue that several of your members have spoken to me about, and I know that the NEA took a very strong stand on several years ago, and that's the issue of making sure that when children come into classrooms that they're properly immunized. This is something the NEA supported because when children receive their basic vaccines, proven vaccines like measles, mumps, and rubella, it prevents a rapid expansion of contagious diseases that have proven to be harmful. It's important because some of our students, and indeed some of our educators, can't take those vaccines, and they can't because they have underlying medical conditions. That's why it's really important, particularly in a pandemic, to make sure that those of us who can be immunized do get immunized so that we protect our colleagues, the families, and the children who can't. And as your governor, I will make sure that we protect and put safety first. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Rebecca Holcombe. And on behalf of my fellow 13,000 members, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And we'll see you on the campaign trail.
Thank you, and thank you to all the educators out there. I'm so grateful for all you've done over the last couple of years to keep us strong.
Thank you.